And welcome back everyone to my personal recap of day number 2 of the FIDE Grand Swiss. The games, most of the games are still ongoing, but a couple of them have already finished and I've already sort of made my pick of the day, which is not one of the top boards, but the idea itself is quite interesting. And I thought many of you might not know it, and it could be a cool addition to your opening repertoire, especially if you play the Sicilian with either black or white. So the game I'm talking about was on the lower boards, at least if you compare it to the top boards, which was between Shant Sargsyan, an Armenian grandmaster who is also my age, and Narayanan SL. There are two Narayanans, if I'm not mistaken. First of all, I would also like to say that picking today's game was quite difficult. I've already seen that a couple of you have been sort of annoyed by my picking of yesterday's top game. It's always going to be quite difficult to make a correct pick because there are always so many interesting games in this tournament, a lot of interesting preparation. But yeah, it's sort of a subjective pick of the game. Anyway, in that game, Sargsyan had the white pieces and he opened with e4. Narayanan went for the Sicilian with knight c6, and we have Rossolimo with bishop b5, e6. Of course, the other main move being g6. Also nowadays, knight f6 is rising to quite a huge popularity in many games here as well. Prague is sort of one of the huge players in the Sveshnikov and in the Rossolimo, among others. But yeah, especially the Indian players have had a lot of games with the e6 Rossolimo, which to my knowledge sort of stems from their work together with Boris Gelfand, that he was the coach of the Indian players for quite a long time. And he sort of showed them quite a lot in the resulting structure. So that would explain quite a lot why so many of them do play the knight c6 Sicilian. So the game continued with short castle, knight g e7 and rook e1. Of course, there are a couple of different other lines for white, including bishop takes e6 here, which is another huge territory. But rook e1 has always been sort of the main line. And the idea is after rook e1 that if black now goes for a6, of course, developing the knight to e7 has the point that now black can recapture with the knight. And if bishop f1, then, well, that's sort of the point of going rook e1. That's what I wanted to say, that the bishop can drop back to f1. And this is how the main line goes. White goes d4. And typically it goes like this, knight f6, bishop e3, take, bishop d7. And the line is fully playable here as well. But yeah, white is the one who is typically pushing for a small edge just because he has some ideas to later on play with c4, knight c3, and then to grab space on the queen side. There are some new ideas here as well, though, like there is some early h5, which I discovered some time ago as well. Meanwhile, many people have played that already as well. But in the game, Narayanan went for the move h6, which I guess at first looks quite ridiculous. But the idea itself is not that new. I think the first time I briefly checked it was like about 3 years ago. And the idea of it is that it's sort of like a waiting move, but at the same time, it's quite a useful one. Because if we go back to the line with a6 after bishop f1, here, d4, knight f6, bishop e3, black would like to play knight d5 generally, at least if they're content with the draw. But the problem here is that white has bishop g5, and h6 has one idea, which is that in all of those lines, that the g5 square is going to be covered. And of course, h6 is always a useful move anyway. But just to make my point, let's say white goes for bishop f1 here, then d5, take d4, knight f6, bishop e3, and now black wouldn't have any issues whatsoever, and he can just go knight d5, and white wouldn't have anything better than to just repeat. Yeah, in the game, Sargsyan went for c3, which is probably the most critical move. I've also checked d4 briefly, which was played in some recent correspondence games, c takes d4, knight takes d4, and here it's sort of the question if h6 is as useful as rook e1 or if it's more useful, because just as a reference, there's also this line with d4 immediately. And here black has both moves queen b6 and knight g6, which doesn't really change much, like with the inclusion of rook e1 and h6. Also here black has both of those options. Both queen b6 and knight g6 has been played in correspondence. This was one game here, and knight e5 came. Generally, of course, black does need to be a little bit careful, objectively speaking, to equalize, but it was never really such an issue, and the position generally felt pretty playable. I would even prefer knight g6 here, because generally I feel like those structures are quite difficult to play for white, even though black has the move h6 here, which is probably not so extremely useful in this position, but it's also not useless at all. And those positions can arise. For example, this was one correspondence game which I inserted a5 stopping b4. And generally what we're also going to see in the game later on, but black is typically trying to go for f5 if he can prepare it. And if that all works out pretty well, then white often ends up, white's king ends up in some trouble pretty quickly. But c3 was played, which is probably the most natural move, and now a6. And now the whole point is, once again, if bishop f1, black can go d5, takes, knight takes d5, d4, and now knight f6 is possible, because after bishop e3, knight d5, again, probably white doesn't have anything better than to repeat, at least. Well, white can of course play on, like white is also not going to be worse if they take on c5, but objectively speaking, black is completely fine here. So in the game, Sargsyan played the move bishop a4, and now b5, bishop c2, bishop b7. Narayanan was in prep until later point, so d4, c takes d4, c takes d4. And now he starts with rook c8. I'm actually not entirely sure if knight g6 immediately is also possible. I didn't check that with the computer. Also looks fine. The only question is if d5 is generally possible. So maybe that was the point of rook c8, that now knight b4 is hitting the bishop on c2 with the tempo. And I'm guessing that this might not be possible because of b4. So I guess this is why he started with rook c8. Anyway, the rook is going to be quite useful there. Knight c3, knight g6. And now d5 was not played, but g3 instead. If d5 now, I would assume that even knight d5 would be possible, and black is just going to develop with, I don't know, bishop e7 or bishop b4 or bishop c5 followed by short castle. And generally what is white's problem is that the bishop on c2 is not really taking part in the game at all. So white played g3, bishop d6, h4. All of those moves have been really logical, I believe. Also g3 is quite useful because sooner or later black could have an idea with knight h4 later on to try and exchange those knights. And generally the knight on g6 does look a little bit awkward here. And white probably should have gone after it right away here by going h5, which white did not do. After h5, knight g7, now e5, bishop b8 was possible. I'm not even sure if e5 was the best move here, but I just wanted to make one point that queen d3 is actually not really dangerous here because black has knight f5, and g4 doesn't work in view of knight b4, and black would already be winning because he can just exchange the powerful bishop on c2, and yeah, probably just dropping all sorts of material there. So a3 was played, which was still fine, by the way. I should also mention that Narayanan's prep, I think, ended somewhere around here. I think with bishop d6, he already started spending time. h4, short castle. Now a3, bishop b8. That was quite interesting, just stepping out of the e5 idea. And now it's really started to go wrong for white, and white played bishop e3, which just is a little bit too slow, and it also runs into knight a5. That was kind of the main issue. White should have gone for h5, and after knight e7, now knight h4. Honestly, I didn't fully get the point of that. I think the main idea is to play knight g4, queen g4 at some moment, but it also does look a little bit strange to just place the knight sort of on the edge of the board like this. So white played bishop e3, which does look pretty natural, but knight a5 was coming. And now after knight e2, I have a feeling that Sargsyan sort of underestimated black's play on the king side, because it still does look like white has a couple of defenders there, but black already has fantastic dynamical resources. In the game, Narayanan went for the very interesting move knight takes h4, which is possible. However, even stronger perhaps would have been f5, and only after e takes f5 now to go knight takes h4, just because now white has already committed himself to open up the diagonal, and black has a very strong attack. Not winning yet, but yeah, looks quite difficult for white to hold. But knight takes h4 was played, which is also incredibly interesting. G takes h4, queen takes h4, and it's very difficult for white, I believe, to find the right way to defend here. Honestly, I was a little bit surprised by Sargsyan's move, which was king g2. The computer says that queen f3 is still the best, and after f5 now he has to find d5 just to fully close the diagonal for the bishop on b7. But still, it does look quite risky because rook f6 and rook g6 could be coming. And after king f1, then black should be quite accurate with bishop e5 now, stopping bishop d4 for good. And on the next move, probably rook f8 is going to come, and then at some moment after e4. So it does still look incredibly scary for white here. Just note that rook f8 doesn't work immediately because of bishop d4. That was the point of going bishop e5 first. So Sargsyan played king g2 with, I mean, I guess the point, well, quite obviously to play rook h1 to guard the h2 square and to kick out the queen. But it does allow queen h2 check, king f3, and it just looks pretty scary for white, to be honest. But both players didn't see or feel that the position is in fact in black's favor, and they did go for the repetition of moves here, and the game ended in a draw. Quick question for you, maybe you can find it. How should black continue? If you want to have a think, then you can stop the video. It's actually not so complicated, I would assume, but the complicated thing is, like, the move itself is not complicated, but I guess it's not entirely easy to evaluate the position afterwards. So the right move is f5, which of course is still quite natural, but after rook h1, now you need to see that the queen just drops back all the way back to c7, and then white cannot really avoid f4 followed by f takes e3, and black in fact would be winning. Maybe this is what both players missed, or at least what black missed in the very end, that the queen can just drop back to c7, and that here it should be winning. I mean, objectively speaking, like, it's not like the game is completely over yet. White still has some chances. Like, for example, I was looking at a line like this, for example, f takes e3, f takes e3, and also here I think black really should go for queen g3 to avoid the exchange of queens, but then it should be pretty clean for black, I assume. But yeah, all of that of course is not so easy to understand in the game. So that was it for today. Again, I think that this line can be quite interesting with h6, at least if you're looking for something in the Rossolimo with the black pieces, and also if you are playing this line with white, then certainly it doesn't hurt to have seen it before. And I'm actually not so sure what is like the best for white. I think the computer was giving b3 as well as one of the moves. I mean, objectively speaking, c3, either c3, d4, or b3 are probably the most critical, but black is doing pretty well in all of those lines, and it's just a fully playable line in the Rossolimo for black. Yes, that was it for today. I actually still need to check how the rest of the games went. There have been quite a few upsets once again, and many interesting other opening ideas. I can just briefly mention that Gukesh played d4, was it d5 or knight f6, and he played c3. It was something like that. d5, bishop g5. This is how Gukesh's game with white went against Erdogmus, it was, and now he's winning. So Gukesh is going to win. But apart from that, I also still need to check what is going on. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed today's recap, this small opening idea. If you have any other suggestions what I should cover on this tournament, let me know in the comment section down below. And apart from that, thank you for watching, and I'm going to see you guys soon.